It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and good morning. It is Sunday, so that can only mean one thing. It is Locked On NFL Sunday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You got myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, host of Locked On Saints, joined as always with my good friend Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, host of Locked On Broncos. Cody, how you doing this morning, man? Glad to be back here with you.
Hey, man, look, we're getting one step closer to football. We got mandatory minicamp coming up this week. I'm excited because mandatory minicamp rolls through. There's a little bit of an off period for players, and then, bam, we're straight into training camp. And according to the NFL, all 32 teams will be open for business this upcoming season. That is huge. We're heading in the right direction, Ross. And to be honest with you, thinking back to last year when we were talking about training camp, preseason, we never thought we'd get back to a point where it's back to normal. I love it. I'm excited, and I'm excited to break it down here with you today.
Absolutely, man. I'm loving it. July 27th, the first time ever for the NFL having a universal reporting date for training camp. So none of this easing in kind of stuff. We're just going right at it and getting right into training camp. So it's going to be a ton of fun. And today's going to be a ton of fun as well. We're going to talk to three of our Locked On NFL local experts, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans, and Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles, focusing mostly on wide receiver storylines, but going to be talking to each of them about how their team's been faring so far over the offseason and looking ahead to 2021. As always, we're here with you on Sundays, but every Monday through Friday, remember, we've got you covered for your favorite team. There's a podcast for you here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Cody, how can they find their favorite team's podcast here on the network?
Oh, absolutely. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, and some shows we're beginning to roll out on YouTube exclusively. So be sure to check the YouTube for your favorite podcast. If it's not there yet, it will be, but video podcasts alongside your daily audio listening experience, your local experts on the biggest stories. They keep you locked on to what's going on with your team.
Absolutely. And one other show we want to give a shout out to here on the network as well. All the sports news that you need every Monday through Friday in less than 20 minutes. This isn't about one team. This is about every team and everything going on all across sports. Search Locked On today on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. So, Cody, let's go ahead and jump into our lead story for today. Packers team president Mark Murphy telling everybody, or coming out and basically saying, the Aaron Rodgers situation is dividing the fan base. What do you think when you hear this statement coming from the from the Packers team president?
Well, you look at it from the perspective of the organization, you look at it from the fans' perspective, and Ross, I don't know if you've been able to see on Twitter, but I tend to click on anything as Packers related, and I just see the responses. And so you have portions of the fan base that are supporting Aaron Rodgers. You have portions of the fan base that are saying, hey, you know what, let him go. He's all ego. I'm just thinking, how can you think that about Aaron Rodgers? He was the MVP last year. He gave you a chance to get to the Super Bowl, and then you decided to kick a field goal rather than going for it on fourth down in the red zone, which has been the subject of a lot of discussions this offseason. But, I think it's normal to kind of have a divide in a situation like this because now, you have the portion where fan base, they're picking sides. It's either they're picking Aaron's side or they're picking the team side, which, I think either or is fine. But dude, it's looking ugly in Green Bay. I feel for our guy, Peter Bukowski, who hosts Locked On Packers every single day, because I just imagine if Aaron Rodgers is gone, I'm waiting for that breaking news segment, the Locked On Now from Peter about his thoughts. It's going to set the NFL world on fire if that does happen. But this is a big week because mandatory minicamp's coming up this week, Ross. And if Aaron Rodgers does not report, he'll be fined $93,000, which may not be a lot to him. But I tell you what, I could do a lot with that type of money, man.
Absolutely.
So we'll see.
That might be another Hawaii trip for Aaron. That's
yes.
What that might be for. Man, look, it's a wild thing. And to have this come from the very top of the organization, not about, I don't want to say that he's putting the blame on Aaron Rodgers, but this situation is just as much on the franchise for the divide, right? Like, this is something that the team president maybe, I don't know, I feel like maybe making a public statement about it is not the best idea in terms of, this whole thing, dividing the fan base, everything, when instead maybe kind of work on getting it resolved, right? Like, shouldn't all the resources and energy be going to resolving the situation as opposed to discussing it publicly?
Absolutely. And I do think, too, as the team president, Mark Murphy, you want to be able to address the fan base a little bit as to what's going on. But the thing that stands out to me is we've already seen the public perception. We've seen the organization make public statements, and that's where Aaron Rodgers has been upset. So does this latest thing with Mark Murphy just further solidify Aaron Rodgers' stance on, the writing is on the wall? Because it does appear. I mean, the perspective you can take it, the organization might be blaming him a little bit, which I think there's equal blame to go around, but you're never going to get that in terms of reaction from fans. It's going to be blame placed on one person or the other. But you were absolutely right. I mean, the Packers had every chance, in my opinion, to put Aaron Rodgers in a position to be happy. Yes, they offered him a big-time money contract, but it's not about that. Aaron Rodgers said it's about loyalty. It's about people. I mean, we're in an industry of business and people, and it's about treating people like they belong and how you do things. I mean, we saw Alex Smith even go on record saying, hey, when I was in Kansas City, the organization came to me and said, hey, this is what we're planning on doing. This is what we're doing. Are you okay with it? They consulted him. They told him what they were doing. They didn't tell Aaron Rodgers, hey, we're going to go get Jordan Love. So obviously, if I was in that position, I'd have some sour feelings as well. So, I mean, it's just ugly. And I think that there's a better way. There's a case study out there to be done that says, hey, maybe how you conduct business, you don't treat it just as business, but you can combine business and also being interpersonal with the people that might be affected by the moves that you're going to make. It's really hard to say because we see it. It's $1 billion business. And often at times people's thoughts, feelings are considered, which is normal. Absolutely. Right.
Like it is a business. But, before Kenny Mayne stole the show at the end of his interview with Aaron Rodgers, one of the things that Aaron Rodgers was talking about was that loyalty that you mentioned. Right. And I have the feeling that he's taking the temperature of that loyalty, not just about what's being directed to him by the franchise, but the way that the players on the team are also feeling, right? I mean, you look at the way that this franchise has continuously kind of downplayed Jordan Love, who is set to be the next guy after Aaron Rodgers, at least for right now. I mean, he's the only other option really on the roster at this point. And so you have to imagine that Aaron Rodgers has also taken the temperature of loyalty and how the franchise is directing it to other teams in addition to how it's being directed to him. Once again, Ross Jackson, Cody Roark here with you, Locked On NFL Sunday. We're going to get to our first guest here in just a moment. But to close this segment out, Cody, I'm going to ask you this, and I'll answer first so you have some time to think about it. But do you feel like there has been a progression or a regression in terms of the relationship between Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers since draft day? Has it gotten better or worse? I'm going to tell you right now, for me, I think it's gotten worse. And I think that's probably the easy route to take, but I do think that it's gotten worse, if nothing else, but by the action of inactivity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think that I think it's done for. It's really hard to see this relationship being repaired. We know that Aaron Rodgers, the rumor was he wanted the GM out, but the team has stood by Gutekunst and said, hey, we're not getting rid of our GM to spite our, the quarterback. Often at times, this is going to be something, look, I think there's going to be a 30 for 30 documentary. There's going to be some behind-the-scenes stuff that's already going on right now. We have no idea what's going on. So we'll see how things go, but I think it's gotten worse. I mean, it's to the point where there's been no communication. All communication has gone through Rodgers' agent, and it hasn't really gone through Rodgers. So Rodgers saying, hey, he's telling his agent, this is what I'm asking, this is what I'm looking for, and he might be firm. I mean, there might be conversations going on right now behind closed doors we're not privy to the public information that Rodgers is like, I'm not coming back. I'm sorry. We've had inklings of that, but nothing really official to stand on. So it's going to be a big week. Is he going to show up? I mean, you mentioned before we went on air here, like Melvin Ingram last year with the Chargers, he just showed up to mandatory minicamp, didn't do anything. He just stood around. Is Aaron Rodgers going to do that? I don't know. I don't think he's going to show up. $93,000 isn't too much for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it's crazy that we even have that we're saying like that's not too much for somebody because that's a lot of money. But I wouldn't want to take that kind of hit in my paycheck. Yeah. So we'll see how things go. But I think this is going to be a very revealing week as to maybe the direction the Packers and Rodgers will go this week.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This could be the barometer in terms of measuring any type of progress if it's been made. And hey, look, if Aaron Rodgers loses $93,000, maybe he just jumps on another State Farm commercial with Chris Paul and Sabrina Ionescu and then ends up moving on, who, by the way, has been incredible over in the WNBA. Hasn't that been fun?
Oh my goodness. She is a stud. I mean, a few weeks ago, she had a game winner. She's an unreal basketball player. Love her, man. But yeah, I mean, she's getting State Farm commercials now. That's when you know you've made it. But Aaron Rodgers, we're gonna see it. Maybe he and Drake are gonna do something. So.
Really finally knock it out. I love it. Well, y'all, every Sunday here on Locked On NFL Sunday, Cody and I come together. We talk about some of the big stories around the league, but we're also always joined by our good friends here across the network. So to open us up on today's episode, we're gonna welcome in our good friend Aaron Freeman of the Locked On Falcons podcast. You could follow him at FalcFans and catch him on the Locked On Falcons podcast every Monday through Friday. Aaron, how you doing, buddy? Good to have you back.
I'm glad to be back. I didn't expect to be back so quickly, but drama ensues. So you guys got to have me on, talk a little bit about Julio Jones.
Well, that's the key, Aaron's like, the Julio stuff. I mean, what was your initial reaction a few weeks ago when Undisputed was going on? For me, I didn't know if that was a stage kind of stunt by Shannon and Julio, but I was really shocked about it. Being in the media industry, I was like, did he have permission to do that? Did he know that he was live? Like, what were your thoughts on that to hear, like, I'm out of there? Like, I mean, what has that done so far to the Atlanta Falcons fan base? Because now I've seen people on Twitter go from supporting Julio to now after this, they're like, get rid of him. He's not the guy. It's so crazy how fast things can change.
Yeah, you guys just talked about it with Aaron Rodgers and the sort of divide. You kind of get that with all these situations. Whenever a player is asking for a trade, whenever a player is holding out for more money, wants a new contract, all these various things, you have that sort of divide within the fan base. And it hasn't been any different here in Atlanta. I think for me, seeing that on Undisputed, it kind of made the Julio Jones trade talk real, right? I think prior to that, it always seemed like the Falcons are willing to part ways with Julio Jones if someone came along and blew them away with an offer. If someone came along and said, here's, a first and a third round pick, the Falcons would, probably not hesitate to trade Julio Jones in that scenario. But it always seemed like this was a situation where eventually the Falcons and Julio Jones would, come together. He would play at least one more year in Atlanta, and then the Falcons would sort of figure out his future after this upcoming season. That had been my expectation all off season long, that was the path that we were headed towards. And then sort of hearing him say what he said to Shannon Sharp on Undisputed was like, oh no, like this is a marriage that is ending. This is not, hey, we can go to counseling and fix this marriage. No, this is, we're pretty much already filed for divorce. It just maybe hasn't been official in terms of court documents, if you get my analogy. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and it seems like we're headed to that direction. The big question, and I'm sure you guys might wind up having me on Locked On NFL Sunday multiple times over the next couple of weeks, with every new news drop and every new change in the situation. But it doesn't seem like this is a trade that is imminent. It seems like the Falcons are going to take their time on this and figure out, who's got the best offer. And we may be going up to, the end of July, going into training camp, maybe even going into August before this whole situation gets resolved. So, just trying to stay patient and just sort of see how everything falls. And, with each new development, not trying to overreact to everything.
Once again, joined by Aaron Freeman at FalcFans on Twitter, host of Locked On Falcons. You mentioned the idea that this could potentially go on for quite a while. If that's the case, especially in a league to where we talk about distractions a lot, maybe too much, honestly, but is that a concern at all with this franchise? I mean, how does Julio Jones go back to the facility after these comments that were aired either by a staged proposal or, unknown by him on live television about the Falcons?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Ross. The term distraction gets thrown around way too much, and it's usually a way for teams to basically say, oh, we don't want this player because we don't want the distraction, which is sort of a catch-all for teams doing whatever they feel is in the best interest of their team. But there's no denying that Julio Jones is the number one story involving the Atlanta Falcons. And, there's a reality where Julio shows up at mini camp next week. And, it's a big deal for a day or two. The Falcons media gets all their questions in and it goes away. That's a scenario. I don't think we're likely living in that sort of scenario, but like, it's one of those things where it could just, if you just sort of own up to it and take it at face value, like it could not necessarily be a huge distraction. But obviously that's going to be the number one storyline, whether Julio shows up and is a quote unquote good soldier or whatever you want to call it in terms of reporting to training camp, reporting to mini camp and saying, look, I'm going to do my job and we'll see what the future holds. And the Falcons can take that same stance, but obviously it's going to be something that people are going to continue to talk about until, I've said before, the only way the two likely endpoints to this situation is Julio actually gets traded, which again, we don't know what exactly the timetable is for that. It could be 6 days, it could be 6 weeks in that regard, or basically the October trade deadline happens and you can't trade him anymore. And then we'll know that he can't be traded at that point in time. So this is not a situation I think is going to go away anytime soon. So I think for the Falcons' perspective, obviously they don't want to necessarily have to deal with this. If they plan on moving forward without Julio Jones on the team, obviously, I don't think they want him to show up at the various things in order to create, a media firestorm, as they may say.
Yeah.
But we'll just sort of have to see how it all goes. This is going to continue to be a story for weeks, if not months.
For sure.
Well, and he's going to have to stay in shape too. And with mandatory minicamp coming up, not sure if there's anything in his contract where if he doesn't show up, if he gets fined or not. But for me, given what we've seen so far this offseason with the NFLPA's notion on training while away, like if Julio were to stay away from the team facility as he waits this trade to happen, similar to what happened with the Broncos and Deshaun Hampton, they were arranging a trade deal. So he was working out away from the team facility because of that. Tore his ACL. A part of me is wondering that Julio will show up just to stay in shape and to stay ready for whenever it happens. I mean, as you mentioned, the Falcons, they could wait till the end of July. I mean, I think it's all about finding out what's best for Atlanta, and they may not in this case. I imagine, I don't think that there'd be sour grapes, but I imagine the deal has to be where it benefits Atlanta, and it also is going to do right by Julio. I think that's going to be where the Falcons are at. I'd be shocked if it weren't. But transitioning away, let's think about life. Like if Julio Jones is playing or if he isn't playing, there's still some interesting angles here about your Atlanta Falcons football team. Obviously going with Kyle Pitts, Matt Ryan back at quarterback, Calvin really hoping to stay healthy this upcoming season. What is the story right now with Atlanta outside of Julio that maybe people aren't really considering, aren't talking about, that deserves talking about?
It's tough to come up with that story, Cody, because I've spent so much time talking about Julio. But, it's one of those things where, I think the Falcons are at a point where this season is going to be really about how good a play caller, how good a head coach Arthur Smith is. Mm-hmm. Because the Falcons, due to their salary cap constraints, didn't really do a whole lot in free agency to enhance their roster. They had a couple of pieces, Mike Davis being one, Cordero Patterson, Deron Harmon on the back end of the secondary. But this team is not demonstrably better than the team they were a year ago from a personnel standpoint. And obviously, you lose something if you lose Julio Jones, a significant part of your offense.
Yeah.
And you're hoping that you get something in the form of Kyle Pitts. You're hoping that Hayden Hurst, who really came on strong in the last couple of games last year and seemed to have that connection with Matt Ryan, you hope you can build off of that and you can get 16 of those games instead of 3 or so of those games. You hope that the development with Russell Gage continues to develop, and you hope, Calvin Ridley ascends to be one of the top receivers in the NFL. I think he's already in the top 10 to 12 guys. Can he go higher in terms of his tier of wide receiver? So you're looking at an offense that really is relying heavily on Arthur Smith to come in here and be the sort of dynamic play caller that he was in Tennessee. And that's going to be the bulk of what your success is going to hinge on. Like this defense, while Dean Pease is a well-respected defensive play caller in this league and has had a lot of success over the last, 2-3 decades that he has been coaching in this league, he doesn't have a lot of firepower on that side of the ball. They have some decent pieces. Grady Jarrett's one of the best T tackles in the league. Deion Jones, as Ross Jackson knows, he can be certainly a big-time playmaker and cause you to have,
Yeah, no, we get it.
Okay.
Hey, I like AJ Terrell as well.
Yes.
I think he's got some promise in that secondary, but yeah, I mean, as somebody who talks about the Broncos and everything every day, we hear about Broncos quarterback this, quarterback that, man. I still think there's so many interesting angles. I do agree with you on the Arthur Smith one, though. It's going to be interesting. Are they gonna change up the offense from last year in a sense where they're going to run more Tennessee style looks? They have Mike Davis. He ain't Derrick Henry, but man, he doesn't skip leg day.
Yeah, absolutely. Arthur Smith's offense is predicated on high level of play action, and the Falcons have been successful in the past running a high level of play action. He's running an offense. He's running a version of that Matt LaFleur offense that he inherited in Tennessee, that Matt LaFleur designed after Kyle Shanahan. Matt LaFleur, of course, was the quarterback coach in Atlanta when Kyle Shanahan was the offensive play caller in 2015 and 2016. So the Falcons are running an offense that they've had a lot of success running, at least in theory, under Arthur Smith. And I think the question is going to be, like, as I was getting to, they have some decent pieces on their defense, but you're probably looking at an average at best defense. If Dean Pease does a great job, they're going to be an average defense, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to be one of the best defenses in the NFL like you guys have been watching with the Saints and Broncos these last couple of years. And so if this team is going to be successful and have a winning season, a lot of it's going to hinge on their offense being able to put up a lot of points each and every week. And certainly they have the capability, the playmakers on that side of the ball. But, obviously, because of the Julio Jones situation, you're losing your best playmaker, and you're putting a little bit more pressure on Arthur Smith to come in here and resolve those issues. And I think that's really going to be the big question. Is Arthur Smith, as good a play caller as he's reputed to be? I certainly think he has the capability of being there, but he's going to have to go out there and prove it as the head coach and as the play caller. And so a lot of pressure is going to be on him to make this team live up to the expectations that they failed to live up to last year. One of the big talking points this offseason has been how good are the Falcons really? That if the Falcons had gotten competent coaching from Dan Quinn and company last year, Dirk Cutter calling plays and Raheem Morris calling defense, would they have been a 7 or 8 win team a year ago? And I think, for my money, I think they should have been that type of team based off of what they had on paper and how they performed in several games, had they not lost some very disheartening late games last year that everybody can recall. And I think, they should have been 2 or 3 wins better. And so if that's the case, can Arthur Smith, as a play caller and as a head coach, bring some new energy? Can he make that team 2 or 3 wins better than that? So I feel like there's room for this Falcons offense to surprise a lot of folks this upcoming season and be a potential wild card playoff contender this upcoming season. But a lot of that hinges on how good Arthur Smith is as a head coach.
Definitely. Y'all, Aaron does such a phenomenal job over at Locked On Falcons every Monday through Friday. So make sure you throw him a follow at FalcFans on Twitter and check out the podcast. You can also check out the Locked On NFL YouTube page, where Aaron was given 4 trade proposals for Julio Jones from, let me see if I can remember, the Seahawks, the Ravens, Titans, and Cardinals. And so go and check out those videos, see what he was offered and what he took. And certainly if that trade happens or does not, we'll be seeing you again here soon as this story, as well as all the other stories around the Atlanta Falcons, continued on unfurl.
Yeah, it seems like it's much easier to get a trade done between us Locked On hosts than early in the NFL. So if
Imagine
only
that.
Will Brock and Alex Clancy were the Arizona Cardinals GM and I was the Falcons GM, I feel like this situation would have got resolved a long time ago.
Would have already been done. Appreciate you coming through, homie. We'll see you again here soon.
All right, see you guys.
And you guys could get Aaron Freeman every single day, the Locked On Falcons podcast, and your favorite podcast provider. Aaron does a great job. And yeah, I think that, for Aaron and just for any analyst that covers a specific team, when there is just one position focus from fans, it really detracts sometimes from being able to focus on the big picture. So There might be a lot of doom and gloom from Falcons fans regarding the Julio Jones situation, but there's also the other side of it. When you look at, how young of a team they are, some of the pieces that they have, there's reason for optimism, because every year, Ross, you know this as well as I do, every year, a team could change for better or for worse, right? A team that was maybe a top in the league last year, they might be surprisingly bad this year. That's just really where things are at. But I'm going to be really intrigued to see how Arthur Smith gets things going for the Falcons offense with Matt Ryan, who I thought played really good football last year. And unfortunately, you dealt with injuries to Julio last year, Calvin last year. It's hard, but he still produced and he still made things happen. So never say never.
Never say never.
Atlanta's heading in a new direction. We'll see how far they go with it.
Absolutely. And, I can't think of a better segue than what our friend here, Steven, dropped in the chat. Let's go Tennessee Titans, get Julio Jones. So in lieu of that, or in addition to that, I think that's just about the best transition that we can expect to get to our next guest, who will also be talking a bit about Julio Jones. But in pursuit of, we're going to bring in our good friend Tyler Rowland at Tic Tac Titans, host of the Locked On Titans podcast, wherever you get your podcast every Monday through Friday. Tyler, thanks so much for being back with us, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Thanks for having me on. Glad to see you guys holding it down, as always, with some incredible NFL off-season content. Not going to find that anywhere else other than the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's go.
Let's go.
Shameless plugs. Shameless plugs to start off the set.
He's good. You deserve the buzzer there, my man. I appreciate it. That was good right there. Hey, Tyler, we just got off with Aaron Freeman, Locked On Falcons. We were talking about Julio Jones. I saw a debate on Twitter where Titans fans were actually debating who's wide receiver one, Julio Jones, AJ Brown. Does it really have to be a debate? I mean, both could be. It doesn't matter if they're wide receiver one. They're both really ridiculously talented athletes. If in fact the Titans were to acquire Julio Jones, what does it do for Tennessee as an organization? How does it change or affect their offense in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I'm sure you guys do as well anytime you do a mailbag, or maybe not you, Ross. There's not a lot of question as to who wide receiver one is in theory or schematically down in New Orleans. But just real quickly, I mean, wide receiver one to me is such a silly conversation to have because schematically speaking in the NFL, these coaches aren't saying we need a wide receiver one. They talk about X. They talk about Z.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like wide receiver one only matters when you talk about your X receiver schematically, the guy who's on the strong side of the field, who is on the line of scrimmage, blah, blah, blah. So that's all whatever. But I think that if Julio comes to Tennessee, you look at A.J. Brown, you look at Josh Reynolds, that would be their top three. All of those guys are over 6'1". They're all big bodied. And I think that the goal would be to have them play everything. See, here's the thing. Arthur Smith, I heard you guys talking about Arthur before I came on. Arthur Smith is gone now, and that leaves Todd Downing as the offensive coordinator. And during his time in Oakland, he did a lot more on offense with RPO. He did a lot more matchup-based things, trying to get certain guys matched up on certain players, isolating tight ends on one side of the field, things like that. So I think while the Titan system is what it is and everyone knows, Todd Downing's going to put more of a matchup-based focus on it. So who's number one, who's this, who's X, who's Z? I don't think any of that matters. What matters is Todd Downing will have more pieces to get matchup advantages for, and that's what really matters here, not the proverbial who's wide receiver one, but for the record, it's A.J. Brown, the guy who's in his prime, who's a stud, who's not 33. So that's my answer.
I mean, look at just imagine Julio on one side, A.J. Brown, either Derrick Henry as the running back. I mean, that is really difficult. If I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm thinking, how do I match up my best defensive personnel against these guys? Because you can't just play. I mean, you can do it, but it's risky. You can't just play one-on-one against Julio or AJ, and you also can't, leave the box wide so Derrick Henry can just run free on the inside. Let's pick your poison.
That's why it's so important. That's why they have to do it. I don't think if you look at all the teams out there that are seriously vying for this, or at least, the video we put up of the different trade packages, you look at, Seattle, you look at Arizona, you look at the Titans. I mean, out of all three of those teams, and you look at the wide receiver groups, you got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Dwayne Eskridge in Seattle. That's pretty solid already. Right. You got AJ Green. Larry Fitzgerald will probably come back for the year. He'll get the bug late in the summer. You got DeAndre Hopkins there, Christian Kirk, Andy Isabella. I mean, whose wide receiver group is elevated more than the Titans wide receiver group with this acquisition? Like, this takes the Titans from a non-NFL wide receiver group, quite frankly, to a Super Bowl caliber receiver group. It makes that big of an impact with what they currently have on the roster. So to me, that's why when all these trade packages get put together and Atlanta wants to make that decision, the Titans have to consider doing what they got to do to Trump, because it means more to them than it's going to mean to any other team that are trying to get Julio.
Would you agree that the best wide receiver tandem that we've seen in Tennessee, and we have to remember that Tennessee Titans, in regards to like their history, includes Houston Oilers, things like that have all been a part of the legacy there. But was the best Tennessee Titans wide receiver group Derek Mason and Kevin Dyson, and would AJ Brown and Julio Jones rival that? Okay,
so I guess it's a conversation about your qualifier or your determining factors there, because Derek Mason and Kevin Dyson were with the Titans for multiple years, and they, went to the Super Bowl. And quite frankly, Kevin Dyson is my favorite all-time Titan ever. So you're gonna have a hard time.
One of my first jerseys I ever owned.
Oh man, he's he wasn't Eddie George or Steve McNair, but that was always my guy. But either way, they were with the team for multiple years. So it's easy to say them, the highlights of the team, they were there making those plays. I mean, Kevin Dyson ran back the Music City Miracle. How am I going to put any tandem over him and Derek Mason? But, I mean, if you're just going pure talent for one season, not for an extended period of time, I don't see how you could – I mean, Derek Mason made a Pro Bowl as a punt returner. Kevin Dyson never made a Pro Bowl. And while I'm fond of Kevin Dyson, just the nostalgia factor – the reality is the Titans have never rolled out a set of wide receivers as talented as A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. You're right on that. Just for one season in particular, that's the most talented group they've ever had. And the Titans may be, if you stacked up, the Titans may be the most wide receiver poor NFL franchise ever. Like it's possible. I mean, if you want to go back into the Houston days, that's fine. I don't want to get my fans upset. That's a divisive topic with the Locked On Titans podcast. The place Houston has in history, whether we should recognize, I don't know. But either way, if you just look at the decades of the Titans in Tennessee, that would certainly be the most talented 2 wide receivers that they've ever put out on the field at the same time. And, with the need that we just talked about, and then what we just said right there, I don't see how John Robinson could let someone beat him out for Julio at this point.
Right.
Well, the next question I have for you, Tyler, it pertains to the offense, right? Because in the playoffs, we saw the Baltimore Ravens come in, and they really limited and shut down what Derrick Henry was able to do. Let's say that the Titans don't acquire Julio Jones. What is in place this year that you feel like the Titans could utilize that might open it up to where they don't make it to where, hey, if you shut down Derrick Henry, you have a better chance winning? Well, I mean, I think that really gave a little bit of a perspective out there to many NFL defenses. How do they adjust and adapt from that and learn from that?
Well, it's kind of a cliche in the NFL because it's week to week and it's going to be hard no matter who you watch, what film. But you really do get a book on a guy. You really do get a book on an offense. I mean, we saw it with the Wildcat stuff in the early 2010s. We saw it with the pistol, with Robert Griffin. And Lamar Jackson's just an elite talent, so it's going to be hard to get a book on him anyway. But the Titans kind of did to a point. I mean, Baltimore won 20-13, but the Ravens' offense wasn't great in that game. And 2 games prior, Titans kind of shut down Lamar Jackson, not from a yardage standpoint, but their offense obviously did not run the way that they wanted it to run in those 2 previous games they lost to the Titans. So to me, the book is kind of out there now on the Titans. You crowd the line of scrimmage. You really bring pressure on the edges. You really shoot gaps on the interior to disrupt the timing of the outside zone. And that's why a big theme that I've had this entire offseason is the Titans have to find a way to diversify their offensive attack. They have the fastball and the changeup with the outside zone run game, the bootleg off of it. They have to have a slider. They have to have a curveball. They have to have something else to go to. And what I mentioned earlier kind of comes full circle. Todd Downing did a lot more matchup stuff, and Todd Downing had the second most productive RPO pass offense per yards per play in 2017 with the Raiders. So he was early on doing some RPO stuff in Oakland that resulted in a lot of success. If the Titans are not going to go out and get Julio Jones, they're going to have to get incredibly creative with that slider or that curveball that they create this year. And I think rookie running back Darrington Evans, who has gotten the Travis Etienne treatment, he had been working with wide receivers during rookie minicamp, not as a position change, but, just adding that versatility. If they can utilize third-round rookie running back from Appalachian State more than they were able to last year due to injury, if they can utilize him more on RPO action, they can run more bubble screens, more tunnel screens to get guys the ball at the line of scrimmage. That'll help them deal with that heavy blitz pressure that they're getting where 6 guys are at the line of scrimmage. You don't know who's coming. Those quick hitting plays to get the ball to your playmakers in space can defeat that pressure that they're putting on the Titans and making Tannehill sit in the pocket and take shots. So if they don't go out and get Julio, they're going to have to do that if they get Julio anyways. But if they don't go out and get Julio Jones, not only will they have to do that, but in my opinion, a guy like a Golden Tate, who's still a free agent, who's a veteran, while people can, snuff their nose at Golden Tate if they want, to me, if we're not getting Julio Jones, then that absolutely has to happen for the Titans. They can't go in with Cam Batson, Nick Westbrook-Akina, Marcus Johnson, Cody Hollister. I mean, do you guys know who any of these guys are? We cover the NFL intimately,
Only because I've heard you talk about them over at Locked On Titans, if I'm being 1,000% honest.
Right. And I wouldn't blame you. I mean, these are not guys. I have a hard time really being serious about the evaluations when we talk about wide receiver on the show because, the Titans have a lot of guys in 3rd, 4th, and 5th wide receiver spots that are 5th, 6th, and practice squad guys. And the Titans are in a win now mode with this group. Derrick Henry's not going to be running for 2,000 yards when he's 31. I don't think that Ryan Tannehill is a guy who's playing into his 40s like we're seeing with Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees. He needs his mobility, his athleticism with a strong arm and his legs to be an effective player. So Kevin Byard's 28. The Titans' defense hasn't gone the way they want. They got to go all in right now if they ever want to bring a championship to the Tennessee Titans. So I think it would be a critical mistake to not pay what you need to pay for Julio just based on the lack of NFL talent that's on the wide receiver group. You can't win a Super Bowl in the NFL with the wide receiver group that they currently have. And that's just the facts.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, everybody, it is Tyler Rowland at Tic Tac Titans every Monday through Friday over at Locked On Titans. Last thing before we get you out of here, Tyler, this is a bit more of an update than a question for you, but we polled all of our hosts here at the Locked On Podcast Network, and this is going to be coming out tomorrow for everybody. I'm going to give a little bit of an early peek for the top 10 quarterbacks across the NFL, and I want you to know Ryan Tannehill makes the list.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. He should. So I'm not one of these people. I'm the Titans guy. I didn't put Tannehill in my top 5, but he's in my top 10. I believe I had him at number 8 overall. And the reality is, while Tannehill has his deficiencies, he's not Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Pat Mahomes, Tom Brady. He's not elite, but I think he's one of the next few guys after that. And the numbers say he's top 5. But, the system does have its benefits. So,
hey, we got breaking news here.
What we got?
Ian Rappaport just tweeted, the Falcons are trading all-pro wide receiver Julio Jones to the Titans in exchange for at least a second-round pick. Adam Schefter says Falcons and Titans still are discussing whether the package for Julio Jones will be a second and a fifth-round pick or a second-round pick with a swap of other picks per source. We got breaking news here on the show, folks.
Let's
get it. Can I say this?
Yes,
Can I
please.
say this right now? So now I got a busy afternoon, guys. So let me just say this. When I did my trade package segment on Locked On Titans with Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons, we said a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick, and then I threw in Rashaan Evans as a defensive starter. But if the Falcons don't want a player back because salary cap, that makes sense. But, hey, second and fifth-round pick, me and Aaron made the deal a week ago. So let's go, baby. Julio to Tennessee.
There we
Julio!
go.
I'm loving it. This is great. This is absolutely great. Tyler, we know that you now have a very, very busy day ahead of you. Everybody make sure you follow at Tic Tac Titans on Twitter for all of the bonus content, all the immediate reactions, the Locked On Now coming soon, everything that you need, all of it on the way. Tyler, we'll let you get out of here, man. But any other closing thoughts about what this means for the Tennessee Titans before you're out of here?
I think that this is the reality that we believe it is right now. Obviously, minds are swirling, but with the Titans, what they have on offense, how they've reallocated a lot of their resources and their money to the defensive side of the ball, I think the Titans have what they need on offense now to continue with that explosive 30-point-per-game offense, and now have put enough on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary with the draft and free agency with the pass rush. The Titans legitimately, I think, are in the top 5 or 6 teams that can say they are a Super Bowl contender in the NFL. And it's a very exciting day and exciting time. I mean, Clowney didn't work out, but the Titans able to land a big-time player like Clowney and be viewed as a team that's a winning team that people want to go to with a good quarterback like Ryan Tannehill. Just the feel around the Tennessee Titans is as optimistic and as different now as it has been since the early 2000s. And I could not be more excited to get the heck off of here and start breaking it all down, man. This is a great time. What timing? Hey, you're not going to find this anywhere else, baby. Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely, buddy. We will see you here soon. Keep up the great work. And we'll see you in a bit. Man, how exciting is that? So everybody, please make sure you go and check out at the top of the screen right over there at Locked On Titans, or not at Locked On Titans, but follow Locked On Titans. Make sure you check them out wherever you get your podcasts, and then below at Tic Tac Titans on Twitter to keep up with everything Tyler's got here. We're going to get to our next guest, Gino Cammilleri, here in just a moment, because I know he can hear us, so I want him to know. We're coming to you in just a moment. But Cody, let's talk about this trade real quick. So the details of this trade, second and fifth round pick is what we're kind of expecting to get Julio Jones from Atlanta to Tennessee.
So what Ian Rappaport is saying right now, the deal may not be official for a couple of days. Julio still has to go to Tennessee, take the physical, but he is landing in Tennessee. More than likely, he's going to be around for that second and fifth. So we'll see how things go. But I mean, this changes the landscape a little bit. We just got done talking with Aaron, and Aaron's like, "Hey, we may not see something to the end of July." Well, he thought he was done, but they brought him back just now. So Locked On Falcons and Locked On Titans, I think, are going to have some really great shows this week to really talk about how this move impacts their respective franchises. Make sure you check out the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite audio podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or the Odyssey app, folks. They have you covered with all the latest news with Julio Jones, and not to mention the Locked On NFL podcast. Bo Brock has Monday's episode, so be sure to check that out as well.
Yeah, these guys are about to be all over the place. If you're in the Atlanta area, turn it to WXIA because I know you're going to see Aaron Freeman on 11 Alive here over the weekend as well. What a wild, wild day for this to, that this breaks as we're sitting there talking to Tyler. So let's talk a little bit about this trade before we get to Gino and the Eagles. What does this mean for the Tennessee Titans? I mean, we hear from Tyler that this makes them a bit of a Super Bowl contender offense. Do you agree with that? Do you think that there's still more things that they need to work on outside, or is this that big of a move for them?
Well, I think it shifts maybe the favoritism for them to win the division in that
Sure.
AFC South division. I think that it was really right now on paper. I mean, when we talk about it, it looks like either Indy or Tennessee. I think it gives Tennessee now the clear-cut advantage. Those matchups are going to be fun. We're going to see some primetime games between those two teams. But I don't know, Ross. I mean, I think outside of it, we see where Tennessee's at. Obviously, for them having a new offense this year, to me, that's the question. How much of their offense really is going to change from what they've been successful at with Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, a lot of that play action, to now they have A.J. Brown, who's a stud. They have Julio Jones, who's a stud. They have Derrick Henry. The tight end position right now is kind of a question for me for Tennessee because we know Jonnu Smith last year was such a huge threat for them. That's going to be an angle for me. It's going to make them better, but is it going to make them favorites in the AFC? I don't think so. Not yet, at least. I think it's going to make them competitive. Obviously, they're in the playoff picture, but does it put them there with Kansas City? I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, no matter what, that's the prestige you're trying to get to, right? Like if you're going to win the AFC, you have to not only topple your division, but you have to topple the Kansas City Chiefs. And so is this enough to get them there? We'll find out. I think that this is really exciting, not only for, Tyler is pumped and he's ready to go, but, you look at what this also means for Ryan Tannehill, what this means for Derrick Henry as well. This has a ripple effect that addresses this entire Tennessee Titans offense and in a way also helps to address the defense as well, to where if there are defensive efficiencies, now all of a sudden this is a team with legitimate firepower on the offensive side to be able to keep pace in a scoring matter in a way that maybe they weren't able to do with a bit more of a run first or run heavy approach behind Derrick Henry.
Hey, just throw it up to Julio. He's going to go get it.
Yeah, he'll find a way to do it.
I thought for them, too, this offseason, I was thinking, the loss of Corey Davis was huge, which, I think it was. But now you factor it in, it's like, okay, it's not really much of a loss at all anymore because you have Julio, you have A.J. Brown, A.J. Brown is so damn unreal as a player. I know our guy, Croc Talk TV, he's watching. Eric Crocker, one of the new co-hosts over there, the Lockdown 49ers podcast. He covers defensive backs. He's got the defensive back angle. But also from a DB's perspective, going up against a guy like A.J. Brown is going to be a tough business. Going up against a guy like Julio Jones, you never really can take the risk of single covering these guys because they can hurt you. It doesn't matter. As long as a quarterback can place the ball high to the outside on a 9 route, Julio is going to win that matchup 9 times out of 10. So it's going to be really tough to see how it goes. But this definitely impacts the landscape of those teams respectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the other thing, too, that I think really helps for, and maybe is the difference for Julio Jones. Julio Jones was a little bit let me not even say a little bit. Let me stop trying to hedge it. He was underutilized in the red zone. Yeah. In Atlanta. You have this guy who is just athletic as all get out, big as all get out. He has all the tools, but was not utilized in the red zone at all. Now, all of a sudden, you have an offense with the Tennessee Titans that has every piece that they need to be able to operate within the 20s in the ground, but then also be able to go to the air, whether it be to Julio Jones or to A.J. Brown, for that matter, between either one of those two guys in the red zone, and finally be able to utilize him in a way that his game continues and moves forward, to where it's not just a yardage conversation for Julio Jones anymore in Tennessee. It's a scoring conversation. It increases his scoring potential to be a part of an offense if they decide to utilize him in the red zone a bit more efficiently and more effectively than the way that he was utilized in Atlanta. So that's one of the biggest shifts that I'm going to be looking for to see if that ends up being a part of his game that accelerates now in Tennessee, because in Atlanta, there wasn't really the other red zone threat. They were about to add one in Kyle Pitts, but they didn't really have the other red zone threat. A.J. Brown is a legitimate red zone threat. Does that help Julio Jones, because of the attention that has to go to A.J. Brown, become equalize on that matter and then become more of a scoring threat within the 20s? Absolutely.
Well, there's that too. And part of me too, I'm looking at now from the Falcons side of things. Mm-hmm. How much do we see Kyle Pitts as an inline guy? Are we going to see him more as a kind of like a split out as a receiver now? Because now you factor in that in. Who else do they have? Obviously Hayden Hurst, the tight end position. You don't necessarily need to utilize Pitts in that position to where he has to be inline. He can be flexed out to the outside because he's got the skill set as a wide receiver too. He's not just tight end. He could do it all. So does this impact them in a way where it's going to benefit them? I mean, I still can't, when I look at the lineup of a potential Julio, Pitts, and Ridley lineup, that's great, but they're not going to get there now. Now it's going to be Ridley and Pitts and Hurst and obviously Mike Davis at tailback. So implications all across the board, but I know that you're glad that Julio Jones is leaving the NFC South division, especially as somebody who covers the Saints every day.
Yeah, I can rest easy. I mean, the guy actually had, the interesting thing is against New Orleans, he only had 3 career touchdowns against the Saints. And the Saints, of course, this is one of the things where you look at his underutilization in the red zone. The Saints were atrocious in the red zone early on in the season last year, and it definitely got better by the time that they ended up facing the Falcons. They didn't end up facing him until later on in the season. But even with the red zone struggles that were there presently throughout the 3, 7, and 9 seasons, 2014, 15, 16, he was just severely underutilized in that offense in positions where they could have been able to take advantage of a team like the New Orleans Saints, who was weak in that area, and they never did. And honestly, look, I think Calvin Ridley is, we talk about a number one. I think that Calvin Ridley is effective as the, let's say, top option in that offense with the style of offense that they play, whether Julio Jones is there or not. So I do think that they continue to have the firepower over on that offensive side to continue to produce. But are they going to, because we have to remember that it does take some time for tight ends to adjust to the NFL game, how quickly can Kyle Pitts be effective? And does it speed up his efficacy because they move him to the outside as opposed to utilizing him in line? That could potentially speed up his ability to be able to contribute to that offense. But now the Falcons have a little bit of shuffling that they'll do to make sure that they produce on the offensive side enough to make sure that they can keep up, just like Aaron Freeman mentioned, with potential deficiencies over on the defensive side. So the scoring potential that Tennessee gains, that is gained because of what's lost in Atlanta.
Especially when you lose 20-13 in the playoffs. You need to be able to score more than 13 points. That offense has the ability now, I think, it's hard to really even put an average on it. But if you look at maybe their overall productivity last year and you add Julio Jones to the mix, maybe they can average 27, 28, even 30 points per game, because it's going to be really hard to stop the rushing attack that is Derrick Henry as is. If that defense can play how it played last year in bits and spurts and stay healthy, they're going to have a really good unit. And as Tyler said, they're kind of in this win now mode. This is the best time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see what the Atlanta Falcons do next. We expect somewhere around a 2nd and a 5th for this trade, sending Julio Jones to the Tennessee Titans. We had a live reaction here with Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland, and Cody and I here breaking it down for you a little bit more as well. So we'll continue to break it down here across the Locked On Podcast Network, Locked On Falcons, Locked On Titans, and of course Locked On NFL and the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. We'll have it covered from every angle you can imagine. So this is going to be a ton of fun here throughout the week to take a look at all of this, and I'm sure you and I will be talking about it again next weekend as well, because there will only be more and more details coming out. But it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons take to free agency, and maybe a guy like Golden Tate, who who Tyler was talking about for Tennessee, could potentially end up coming in and contributing to help reload a bit at that wide receiver position for Atlanta.
Yeah, why not? I mean, hey, you got to take the chance on it and make it happen. But, Ross, there's still some free agents out there that I didn't expect to still be available. I mean, we're talking KJ Wright. We're talking about Melvin Ingram. I mean, this Richard Sherman. I mean, this is a situation free. Some of these guys that, are big time names in the NFL, they currently don't have a team, so they're playing it off. But let's see how things go. Aaron S. in the chat says, I thought Julio wanted to go to a contender. I mean, I do think that Tennessee has the ability. I mean, let's not forget, they were in the AFC Championship game a couple of years ago. They made it that far. So they're not that far off, to be honest with you. Defensively, they've gotten better. And then we factor in the offensive side of the ball, they are drastically more improved than they have been. So I don't think it's a short sight to say that they are a contender. I think that they have the ability to be one. Yeah,
absolutely. And, you mentioned all those free agents that are still out on the market, still a lot of opportunity for teams to build up over the course of the offseason. And a team that I have been pretty impressed with so far here over the offseason has been the Philadelphia Eagles. He's been very patient. Let's get to our guy, Gino Cammilleri of the Locked On Eagles podcast at GC24_football on Twitter, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, along with Louis DiBiase. Gino, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, man. Thanks for your patience as well with all the breaking news.
Oh, absolutely. As somebody that's under the Howie Roseman tree here in Philadelphia, we're always used to things just happening out of nowhere. I was coming back from the CGS All-Star game when they hired Nick Sirianni. I had to do the pod right in the airport. So it just happens. But I am glad that week 1, we will no longer have to face Julio Jones.
That's right.
After holding him for 4 straight downs in the NFC divisional matchup a couple years ago. I never want to play him again. He just always gives me so much anxiety watching him. I'm happy we don't have to defend him, but man, Tennessee, go out there and win that division so it helps out the Eagles pick that they got from the Colts last year for Carson Wentz. So I'm fully on board with that Titans move.
There you go. It's a really great choice.
Gino, good morning, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us here on today's episode, Locked On NFL Sunday. We're talking a little bit about wide receivers today. It's been really wide receiver centric focused, and so far, you take a look at the addition of Devontae Smith now to the Eagles. We look at the overall prospects right now of the Eagles offense. A lot of changes. Nick Sirianni as the new offensive coordinator. Actually, as the new guy for them in general, he's going to more likely call the offense as the head coach. But the question I have for you. We haven't seen much of a commitment so far to Jalen Hurts just yet. Is there any specific reason as to why, or are they just going into things with tempered expectations and hoping that they can build up to that, especially with Jalen Reagor, and now you have the addition now of Smith at the wide receiver position? What does this do for Philadelphia?
Yeah, so when you look at it, I think the one element that Nick Sirianni has really kind of instilled in every time that he has talked is that there's going to be competition. Mm-hmm. Jalen Hurts is going to win the job. I mean, I don't want to see Joe Flacco. I don't think anybody wants to see Joe Flacco. And Jalen Hurts, he is an asset that we took with a top 2 pick. He was the 53rd overall selection. He's a guy who at least needs 10 to 15 more games to evaluate. In my opinion, with a full offseason, with rejuvenated weapons, with an offensive line that is fully healthy now, Jalen Hurts is going to take that position, and it's his to lose. I think by week 10, if we can sit here and say, okay, Jalen is the guy for next year, that's great. But at the same time, if you realize that he isn't the guy, you have steps forward that you could take now with what you've done in the draft, what you have done in free agency. I think they've addressed a lot of their issues more proactively than they have in the past. A lot of their past picks were luxury picks. Now they're making picks out of necessity to grow a team with regardless of who the quarterback is. Mm-hmm. But I believe they've done everything to give Jalen Hurts and Jalen Reagor and Devontae Smith and the young group of guys that they have on offense everything they need to be able to evaluate this roster. And I ultimately believe 2021 is an evaluation season. Who are we taking forward? We've cut a lot of this quote-unquote dead weight from the Super Bowl era that no longer really had it in them to keep playing. We know that Zach Ertz is kind of on the outs. A team that, hey, Tennessee, you want a tight end? Now that Jonu's gone, get to calling if you're in the trading mood on Zach Ertz. But when it comes down to it, it's a young team with a young quarterback, with a young coach. The first few weeks of the season, they might surprise people. But I just want to see consistency. I want to see competition, and I just want to see this team be able to hold themselves accountable for once and not really point fingers, just go in and say, this is our job. We didn't do what we had to do Monday through Saturday, and that's why we lost on Sunday, or that's why we won on Sunday. And I really think Nick Sirianni has been the leader at his age that I don't think many people had expected.
Yeah.
But clearly I think it's his team. He's saying everything right. He really wants to put these guys in the position to do what they do well, which to somebody who comes from a scouting background, it's music to my ears. I just want to see this team be able to evaluate players because last year and the year before that, with so many injuries, you just have more question marks than you did 2 years ago. We're sitting here. Do we have a left tackle of the future? What are we going to do at cornerback number 2? Do we have a running back 2 on the roster now, and who is it going to be? There are so many questions with this team, but those questions are getting filled up, and I think the clouds have cleared the last 6 months to really see what our path is going forward.
It's great to hear, and I love what you're saying about Nick Sirianni. I mean, as somebody that covers Sean Payton has very much with the New Orleans Saints that same type of idea, right? Like everybody that comes in that joins the roster, there's a vision, and there's the opportunity to put them in a position to where they're able to do what it is that they do best, as opposed to trying to square peg round hole any of these players. What has been the feedback, or let's say the temperature around Nick Sirianni? Because as he was hired, there were a lot of negative, think pieces written all about it. The video went viral of his first press conference, perhaps undeservedly so. What has been the temperature around Nick Sirianni and what he's brought to Philadelphia Eagles so far, now that he's actually in the building?
So the first thing that really popped off to me was that Jeffrey Lurie trusted this individual. And he's a guy who really brands the Eagles around loyalty. You've seen that Howie Roseman has been there for so long. They like to keep their guys in house. You have Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox. A lot of these guys are on their second and third contracts. They like to have guys that are loyal and buy into the system. And I love what you said. He is finally doing what a coach should do and putting these guys in a square peg in a square hole, which you should have done all along. There's no reason that Jalen Hurts should be running the same type of offense that Carson Wentz was, or even Nick Foles was. And Doug Peterson, it kind of got to the point where he was more scheme over personnel, and he just tried to keep doing the things that worked when they really hadn't. And Nick Sirianni, he comes from Indianapolis, where you had three different quarterbacks of three different calibers, of three different athletic profiles, and three different skill sets the last 3 years. Who better than to take this team and build it around whatever the quarterback is? But when you look at what people are saying, the rookies are super high on him, talking about the whole rock, paper, scissors thing. He measures competition. He always wants to compete. And to me, what he said in his press conference the other day, that you have to compete to get better at competing. So doing little things like throwing the tetherball football like a jugs machine, having the cornerback's foot race, and doing what the players are supposed to do at their respective positions is everything you want a coaching staff to do. And Brandon Graham has spoken highly of Nick Sirianni. He had said that you could really feel the juice from him. He's always in the practices with the players. He's a younger guy. He could actually run routes with the guys. So to me, he's actually building that family element that we thought they had in 2017, but once we heard what really happened and slipped through the cracks, we knew that that team wasn't as cohesive as we thought. I believe, and I'm a firm believer in, you can get places in any aspect of life with people who buy in and have the same mentality.
Sure.
Everything that they have done this offseason, Nick Sirianni at head coach, bringing in the two Bama guys as your first draft picks, bringing in some of these older veterans like Ryan Kerrigan who know what to do and who know how to be professionals and have come from cultures that have been implemented into the NFL through Alabama and through a lot of these better teams, because college becomes the NFL, and it's an ebb and flow of how that works. And now you have guys in place that if I'm a wide receiver behind Devontae and I see him getting 200 reps on the jugs machine after practice, I'm going to say, okay, I probably need 300 to 400 reps on the machine because I'm not as good as Devontae. And they want to breed that competition. They put a ping pong table in the meeting room, and they're doing ping pong games after their meetings in the meeting room just to get guys juiced up for practice. And to me, you should want to have that mentality because you're in the most competitive league and arguably one of the top 5 hardest leagues to get into in the world. You want to have guys that are there to compete week in and week out. And Nick Sirianni says that. You hear what he talked about with his high school football back to Southwestern days in Western New York. His family is just, it's a hotbed of talent down there. And he comes from that long lineage of a football family. He played football. He knows what the guys have to do in the locker room. And he's giving them the respect that they deserve. And rightfully so, he's getting respect back. And I want to see that continue throughout the season and just put those guys in a position to win because this team has too much athleticism and explosion year over year compared to last year to not be a better team on both offense and defense. And the old adage goes, if you out-hustle your opponent, you can win a lot of games, and that's what's going to have to happen for the Eagles. And that tells you a lot about these guys, if they have bought in or if they are out. And if they're out, see you later. If they're bought in, let's move forward together.
Yeah.
That's super important too. I think in anything, whether it be football, whether it be business or life, I think the culture that you have as an organization is the most important thing. And so that's something that was obviously lacking with Philadelphia with Doug Peterson and obviously Schwartz as the DC. Everything in Philadelphia was headed down a downward spiral. Sirianni, being a young guy, has a chance to really connect with players. And that's the most important aspect about coaching. Yes, the NFL is a business, but you have to connect with the guys that you're coaching, or else, as you mentioned, you're not going to get that buy-in. I know that as a coach myself and as a guy who's played on many teams, it is super important to have that value in your locker room. So yes, that is great. I mean, we even saw that with Joe Judge last year with the Giants, and he got trashed by people. What is he doing? You know what? Ping pong may seem a little unorthodox, but there's a meaning behind it. There's a reason why. It may be a laughingstock to people outside that really don't understand the concept of it, but it's super important. Team building is the most important thing. And it looks like the Eagles are headed on that track, and especially in a division where the Washington football team, they're much better. They have a strong defense. The New York Giants, they got better this offseason. The Eagles, at this point, I think, are in a position. They need to build with Sirianni, even if it takes 1 or 2 years to get to maybe where they want to be. I think they have the right guy there.
I totally agree with you. And I think the team building element, above all, is going to take you far. I look at a team in Buffalo, for example. Like the last 3 years, they have just been all about this Sean McDermott culture, this Brandon Beane culture. And a team for 20 plus years that never made the playoffs is now a consistent playoff / Super Bowl contender.
Right.
We thought the new norm that Doug Peterson was going to bring after they won the Super Bowl was exactly that. And we saw that didn't work out. And that becomes, okay, why did that happen? Because they didn't buy in. They didn't trust Doug. They didn't trust the management ahead. Now I feel like Howie has turned a new leaf. You have a new head coach where nobody is given anything. Everybody's going to have to earn their spot, where as opposed to the last few years, it's, okay, Alshon Jeffrey, you're back after missing a full season worth of work, but we're going to throw you out there anyway and not really evaluate our young talent, which isn't how you succeed in the NFL. Cody, you're a Denver fan right now. I mean, the team is as young as any team in the NFL. Imagine if they just brought out a veteran to take snaps from a guy like Jerry Jeudy, for example, at the wide receiver position, or even a guy like Sutton, for example. They did that. They took our number one receiver, our number one young receiver, and Jalen Reagor off the field to play a guy like Alshon. Now it's put the young guys on the field. Can they run? Can they win? Can they compete? That's what this team is. And drafting 2 Alabama guys right out the gate when you hadn't drafted an Alabama player in 20 plus years, to me, that speaks more about the culture and the want to win more than anything that they have done this offseason. And I really think it echoes every move that they have made. And I'm glad you said you liked their offseason, because I don't think a lot of people have really given them the credit that they have deserved with a lot of these 1-year moves, which they might seem like Band-Aids and Ryan Kerrigan. But you can't just be the Cleveland Browns of 2015 or 16 when they had that young team, no veterans, they lose every game. You need veterans on this team to tell your guys how to win, what to do Monday through Saturday, what to do on the field. If I'm a guy right now, like a young player in Josh Sweat, who's coming into his second contract, or any of the edge guys that they drafted last year, I'm talking to Brandon Graham and Ryan Kerrigan as much as possible every single day, to learn to know what it takes to be that good at that age. Because that's ultimately what you want your draft picks to do. You want them on your second, third, and fourth contracts. Be a team like the Saints with Mickey Loomis, who trusts the guys that they bring in. They're fair to the guys that they have in the building, and they're not trying to just go out and compile a great team. They're trying to compile great people as well as a great performance on the field, which is, it isn't just put the best guys out there. Put the best people out there is ultimately what it comes down to.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I have enjoyed their offseason a ton, and I think that we don't give enough credit to Philadelphia based on those 1-year contracts without understanding that every team is subject to the salary cap drop. So the 1-year contracts became something that was a part of just trying to navigate that situation. So I'm loving it. And Gino, it's always a pleasure to have you here on the show, man. Y'all can follow Gino on Twitter at GC24_football. You can catch him and his co-host Louis DiBiase over at the Locked On Eagles podcast every Monday through Friday. Always a pleasure, buddy. Take care, and we'll see you here again soon.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. You know, I'm always welcome to come on. And Cody, I can't wait to see you in Power Field at Mile High in a few months when the Eagles take on Denver. I'm excited, man.
It's going to be fun, my man. I appreciate you. And keep up the amazing work you're doing over there at the Locked On Eagles podcast.
All right, guys. Have a good one. Thank you.
See you, buddy.
Bam. Yeah, the Eagles are an interesting team. You know, the NFC East, Dak's back. I mean, you factor in Ryan Fitzmagic now in Washington. It's going to be I have my thoughts on that. That's for another day. But then, the New York Giants, they added some talent all around there. But I mean, yeah, I think the Eagles, you got to build culture. And the way that you build culture is the most important foundation. I mean, so many NFL teams, and Ross, I mean, maybe we see a trend with some of these teams. They're always at the bottom of the NFL every single year. Maybe there is an issue with the culture there, which is why nothing ever changes.
Right.
Culture changes hard. And as Gino was alluding to, it requires buy-in. If players aren't bought in, you're not going to get there. If you have one or two detractors in a locker room who are not buying into the culture while everybody else is trying to, it's still going to be tumultuous, man. And so you really have to change things. So I think the Eagles are heading in the right direction. They may not be successful in terms of win-losses this year, but they have a chance to grow and build. And I think that's exactly where the Eagles are at. You have to be realistic as a franchise. If I'm sitting in there as the GM, as the owner of the team, where are we at? Do we have a legitimate chance to compete for a Super Bowl? If not, we need to set our expectations for this year. We need to build with Sirianni. He's a young guy. He has a chance to be maybe one of the next big names in terms of the coaching rounds of what he's able to do. Obviously, with his offensive success in Indianapolis, has to see it translate now, and you have to give him a chance to grow it. And if it doesn't happen right away in year one, doesn't mean they're not going to get there.
Absolutely. Such a great point, and such an interesting team, and really division. I mean, I say this every time we talk about the NFC East. I really think the NFC East is going to be incredibly interesting to watch over the course of the 2021 season to sort of figure out how that whole division and those teams are going to pan out. Cody, we had plans for our final thoughts segment today to talk a little bit about the Cam Newton injury, to talk a little bit about the Bashaud Breeland sighting in Minnesota, but we can't pass up the biggest news that's going on. So we got to wrap this one up for today, but we're going to give our final thoughts on Julio Jones being traded to the Tennessee Titans. And Cody, just as a little bit of a primer for the conversation here, I'm over at betonline.ag, and they have the expected win totals for teams. And unfortunately, they've taken both the Atlanta Falcons and the Tennessee Titans off for right now. But before, the Atlanta Falcons were sitting right around 8.5 wins, the Tennessee Titans sitting right around 9.5 wins. Do you expect that those teams are going to come in over or under now based upon this trade?
I think Atlanta under, I think Tennessee over.
Yeah, pretty easy to kind of figure it out from that aspect, right?
Yeah.
Like Tennessee adds a ton of talent. The Atlanta Falcons lose a ton of talent, but have some building blocks going into next year.
Absolutely. It's going to be a wild ride. Look, I mean, it's going to be chaos. The storylines are going to obviously be Julio this week. Are they going to transition to Aaron Rodgers at some point this offseason? Or is it going to change? Is something going to happen? Dude, it's going to be chaos, though. But we had, it's crazy. We had breaking news happen during this live show, so that's great. I mean, obviously a great reaction from, being able to see our local experts, Tyler Rowland of the Tennessee Titans. Unfortunately, we didn't get our guy Aaron Freeman's reaction at the time. So there will be a Locked On now. Be sure to check out the Locked On Network on Twitter. We'll be able to post all that stuff. But a lot of great coverage. And also tomorrow's episode, Locked On Today with Peter Bukowski, is going to be huge. Locked On NFL with Bo Brock is going to be huge. So make sure you add those to your podcast lineups for your daily listening experience on all things professional sports and professional football.
Absolutely. So such a pleasure, man. We'll be back at it again next weekend. If you missed the breaking news here with Cody, with myself, Ross Jackson, and Tyler Rowland, host of Locked On Titans, don't worry. Just head over to the Locked On NFL YouTube page later on today, and you'll be able to see all of these videos broken up and posted up over on the YouTube page here throughout the week. So for my good friend Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, I am Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola. We appreciate you being here with us for another edition of Locked On NFL Sunday. We'll see you here next week. We'll be right back at it talking with more storylines. It'll be a ton of fun, and we appreciate everybody for being here. Cody, I always like to make sure that you wrap it up, man, because you've got the punch. You've always got the punch to close it out, brother.
Absolutely. You need NFL coverage, all football talk, no fluff. Locked On NFL Sunday Live is your go-to every single Sunday. We bring you the local experts on the biggest stories here, talking about the teams that you root for on Sundays. We'll see you next Sunday for a brand new episode of the show.